The Preparation Protocol. Ambassador Vexlor of the Galactic Conclave adjusted the environmental controls on his exosuit for the fourth time in the past hour. His translucent skin rippled with anxiety, the chromatophores beneath pulsing between deep indigo and sickly yellow, a clear sign of distress among the Lemurians. The medical officer, Dr. Ishana, monitored the readings on her biopad with growing concern. Ambassador, your vitals are spiking again. I must insist you take another dose of the Terran encounter stabilization medication. Her voice was melodic but firm. 3 of her eye stalks focused on the ambassador, while the 4th monitored the approaching shuttle on the view screen. Vexlor's gill membranes fluttered in resignation. These pills, they make my consciousness feel like it's swimming in nebular gas. How am I supposed to negotiate effectively when my mind is dulled? The alternative is much worse, Ishana replied, dispensing a luminescent blue capsule from a sealed container. Without the TES medication, exposure to humans for more than 15 minutes has resulted in complete psychological collapse in 87% of diplomats. The remaining 13% experienced only partial breakdowns, but were still unable to complete their missions. The Lumerian ambassador accepted the pill with a delicate tendril, examining it with obvious distaste before placing it in his oral cavity. The medication dissolved instantly, spreading a numbing sensation throughout his neural network. I've studied the briefings, he said, his voice already taking on the telltale flatness that indicated the medication was working. Evolved on a Class 12 death world. Endoskeletal. Can withstand radiation levels that would dissolve our kind. Regenerate from injuries that would be fatal to most species. Sleep only once per day cycle instead of the standard 8. And yet somehow classified as a non-predatory species, despite clear anatomical and behavioral evidence to the contrary. Dr. Ishana's skin flickered with a pattern that indicated professional agreement. The Conclave's classification system has its limitations. Humans defy conventional categorization. Why do we even bother with diplomatic relations? Vexlor asked, his anxiety now chemically suppressed to manageable levels. Could we not simply quarantine their solar system and be done with it? You know why, Ambassador. Their technological innovation rate exceeds that of any known species. Their medical advancements alone have revolutionized treatment for 17 different conclave races, and their military capabilities. She paused, all 4 eye stalks blinking simultaneously. The conclave needs humans as allies, not adversaries. The Schutz's communication system chimed with a soft, melodic tone, specifically designed to avoid triggering fight-or-flight responses in alien physiologies. The human delegation's shuttle has docked, Ambassador, announced the disembodied voice of the ship's eye. They will be arriving at Conference Chamber Alpha in approximately 5 minutes. Vexlor rose to his full height, his exosuit humming as it adjusted to his movement. Very well. How long until the medication reaches peak effectiveness? 3 more minutes, Ishana replied, checking her instruments. Remember the protocols. No sudden movements. Maintain a distance of at least 2 meters. Do not show signs of fear or distress. They interpret these as signs of deception or weakness. And most importantly, do not accept any food or beverages. I am not a novice, Doctor, Vexlor said, his voice emotionless thanks to the TES. This is my 3rd human encounter, and you required triple the standard therapy sessions after each previous meeting. She reminded him gently. These precautions exist for good reason. The ambassador didn't respond, instead focusing on the various treaty points he needed to negotiate. The medication was reaching full potency now, bringing with it an artificial sense of calm and detachment. The universe seemed less threatening, more manageable. Even the thought of sharing a room with creatures whose bodies contained enough natural acids to dissolve Lumerian tissue on contact no longer sent waves of panic through his system. Conference Chamber Alpha had been specially modified for interspecies diplomacy. The lighting was calibrated to be visible but not uncomfortable across 12 different visual spectra. The atmosphere was constantly filtered and adjusted, removing components that might be intoxicating or toxic to various physiologies. Gravity generators maintained a careful compromise between the preferences of different species. Emergency medical stations were positioned at regular intervals, each equipped to handle the specific biochemistries of all attending delegates. The chamber doors parted with a soft hiss, and the human delegation entered. There were 3 of them, 2 males and 1 female, according to the briefing materials, all displaying the unsettling characteristics typical of their species: bipedal locomotion with dangerous speeds and acceleration capabilities, exposed facial features with those disconcerting white masticating bones visible when they performed their smile gesture, and the peculiar coverings they wrapped around their forms. Clothing, they called it, though why a species with such environmental tolerance required artificial protection remained a mystery to many xenobiologists. Ambassador Vexilor, the lead human, extended one of its upper manipulator appendages. "A pleasure to meet you. I'm diplomatic envoy Elena Reyes of the Terran Diplomatic Corps." Vexilor carefully extended a tendril in the accepted greeting posture, careful not to actually make physical contact. "The pleasure is mutual, Envoy Reyes. I trust your journey was without incident." The human made the strange barking sound that indicated amusement. "Oh, we hit a bit of a radiation storm near the Cygnus Passage. Nothing major, just enough to fry our secondary communication array. Our engineer jury-rigged a replacement using parts from the food synthesizer and a spare datavat." The ambassador felt a flicker of unease despite the medication. The Cygnus Passage was notorious for radiation levels that would reduce most spacecraft to molecular slag. The human had described it as a minor inconvenience. "Please be seated." Vexilor gestured to the reinforced chairs designed to accommodate human physiology. "We have much to discuss regarding the proposed mining operations in the Viridian Belt." As the humans settled into their seats with alarming speed and efficiency, Ambassador Vexilor noticed that his secondary neural cluster had begun pulsing at an elevated rate. A quick internal diagnostic confirmed his suspicion. The medication was being metabolized faster than expected. The xenobiologists had warned of this possibility. Something about human pheromones and stress responses accelerating pharmaceutical degradation. The female human leaned forward, her sudden movement causing Vexilor's tendrils to retract instinctively despite his best efforts at control. "Ambassador, we've reviewed the Conclave's proposal regarding resource extraction rights in the Viridian Belt," she began, pulling up a holographic display from her datapad. "We have some concerns about the restrictions on deuterium harvesting." Vexilor forced his attention back to the diplomatic matter at hand, even as he felt the artificial calm of the medication beginning to recede at the edges of his consciousness. The Conclave believes that given the proximity to Euler nesting grounds, unrestricted deuterium harvesting could have catastrophic effects on their larval development cycle, he explained, projecting relevant data onto the shared holographic interface between them. One of the male humans, Terran security attaché Marcus Chen, according to the identification tags, leaned back in his chair with a gesture that xenopsychologists had categorized as casual dismissal. "The Euler only nest once every 87 standard years," Chen said. "Our operation would be complete well before the next cycle begins, and our environmental impact assessments show minimal residual effects." That assessment was conducted using human parameters, Vexilor countered, noticing that 2 of his sensory tendrils had begun to twitch as the medication's effect diminished further. "Euler young are sensitive to quantum fluctuations 1,000 times smaller than what your instruments can detect." The humans exchanged glances, a behavior that evolutionary biologists theorized was a remnant of their pack-hunting past. The third human, science liaison Dr. Katsumi Watanabe, tapped something into his datapad. "What if we were to implement quantum stabilization fields around our harvesters?" he suggested, displaying a schematic that appeared to have been designed on the spot. "We've been developing this technology for precision work near neutron stars. It should be adaptable to protect the Euler breeding grounds." The proposal was elegant, practical, and addressed all of Vexilor's concerns. He felt a surge of irrational frustration at how effortlessly these deathworlders navigated complex scientific and diplomatic challenges that would have other species locked in research committees for decades. That could be acceptable, he conceded, aware that his voice modulation was becoming less stable as the medication continued to wear off. I will present the proposal to the Conclave's Ecological Preservation Committee. Excellent. Envoy Reyes smiled, the gesture exposing even more of those disturbing white calcium structures in her mouth. Now, regarding the security arrangements, we'd like to station a small defensive presence in the region. Purely precautionary, of course. Vexilor's skin rippled involuntarily, chromatophores beginning to display stress patterns despite his best efforts at control. Define small. Nothing major, Chen replied with that same casual tone that made Vexilor's tertiary heart constrict. 2 patrol cruisers, a carrier group with support vessels, and maybe a few dozen autonomous defense platforms. What humans considered small represented enough firepower to subjugate an entire sector. Vexilor felt his respiratory sacs constrict as the last of the TES medication faded from his system, leaving him increasingly vulnerable to the full psychological impact of human presence. The meeting continued with mounting difficulty as the chemical buffer between Vexilor's evolutionary instincts and his rational mind grew thinner. What had begun as mild discomfort had escalated into full neurological alarm. His body was recognizing what his medicated mind had temporarily forgotten. He was in a confined space with apex predators from a death world. The breaking point. Ambassador Vexilor's chromatophores were now pulsing in rapid, uncontrolled patterns, a biological response to extreme stress that no amount of diplomatic training could fully suppress. The careful control he had maintained through centuries of interspecies negotiations was unraveling faster than a quantum filament in a black hole's event horizon. Dr. Ishana, monitoring from an adjacent chamber, noticed the biometric spikes and sent an urgent message to his neural implant. Ambassador, your TES levels are critically low. I recommend immediate withdrawal for supplemental medication. He dismissed the notification with a flick of his tendril. The treaty was too important. The Conclave needed these mining rights, and more importantly, they needed human cooperation. Failure was not an option, even if success came at the cost of his psychological well-being. The humans continued their presentation, blissfully unaware of the internal crisis occurring across the table. Or perhaps they were aware and simply didn't recognize its significance, another disturbing possibility. So as you can see, Ambassador, Science Liaison Watanabe was saying, displaying complex mining schematics, our extraction process minimizes quantum disturbances to less than 0.00003 Planck units. That's well below even the most sensitive threshold for Euler larval development. Vexilor tried to focus on the technical specifications, but found himself instead fixating on the human's physical characteristics. Their skeletal structure, bones on the inside like some kind of inverted crustacean, could withstand pressures that would shatter a Lumerian's supporting cartilage into fragments. Their skin, seemingly fragile, could repair itself from lacerations that would be fatal to most conclave species. Most disturbing of all, they required only a single rest cycle per standard day, and could remain conscious and alert for days if necessary. They were, by any reasonable biological standard, terrifying. Ambassador. Envoy Rice's voice cut through his cataloging of their frightening attributes. Do you have thoughts on our proposed modifications? All of his eye stalks blinked simultaneously, a clear sign of Lumerian distress. The proposal has merit, he managed, having absorbed almost nothing of the presentation. The Conclave is always open to innovative solutions. Rice was studying him with an expression that synopsychologists had labeled as concern. Are you all right, Ambassador? You seem distressed. I am perfectly functional. Vexilor lied, his voice modulator struggling to maintain even tones as his chromatophores flashed warning patterns across his translucent skin, simply processing the implications of your proposal. The truth was far more alarming. Without the buffer of the TES medication, His mind was now fully registering what it meant to be in proximity to humans. Every casual movement they made, the way Attach Chen drummed his fingers on the table, how Dr. Watanabe adjusted his position in his chair, the manner in which Envoy Reyes periodically brushed a strand of protein filament, hair, away from her visual organs, all registered as potential threats. The ship's environmental system chose that moment to perform a routine recalibration, causing a momentary fluctuation in the lighting. To most species, it would have been barely perceptible. Vexlor, his nervous system already at maximum alert, reacted instinctively. His exosuit's defensive protocols activated, creating a shimmering barrier between himself and the humans as his tendrils retracted fully into his protective mantle. The humans froze, clearly recognizing the defensive posture when they saw one. "Ambassador," Rice said carefully, making no sudden movements, "is there a problem with the negotiations?" The diplomatic part of Vexlor's mind, the part trained through centuries of interspecies relations, knew he should deactivate the barrier and continue the meeting. But the primitive, evolutionary part of his consciousness, the part that recognized apex predators regardless of their technological trappings or diplomatic credentials, had seized control of his autonomic functions. "I require a brief recess," he managed, his voice modulator glitching badly now, producing harmonic distortions that sounded like distress calls to Lumerian ears. Before any of the humans could respond, the chamber's emergency medical protocols activated. Dr. Ishana's voice came through the communication system. "Please excuse the interruption. Ambassador Vexlor requires immediate medical attention. Security protocols dictate a temporary suspension of diplomatic proceedings." A partition rose from the floor, separating Vexlor from the human delegation. The moment the physical barrier was in place, the ambassador's defensive systems began to power down, his chromatophores gradually shifting from crisis patterns to mere distress indicators. Dr. Ishana entered through a side door, quickly administering an emergency dose of TES directly into his primary circulatory system. Within moments, the artificial calm began to spread through his neural network once again. "This is unacceptable," Vexlor said, his voice already regaining its medicated flatness. "The Conclave cannot afford such diplomatic incidents." "Your safety takes priority, Ambassador," Ishana replied firmly. "The humans will understand." And surprisingly, they did. When the partition retracted 15 minutes later, the human delegation remained seated, displaying none of the offense or aggression that many species would have exhibited after such an abrupt interruption. "Ambassador," Envoy Reyes said, her voice modulated to a careful softness that their xenolinguists must have advised was non-threatening to Lumerian auditory reception. "We sincerely apologize for any distress we may have caused. We've been briefed on the biological challenges that interspecies diplomacy presents, but understanding academically is different from seeing it firsthand." Vexlor, now fully under the influence of a double dose of TES, inclined his mantle in the Lumerian gesture of acknowledgement. "No apology is necessary, Envoy. The fault lies with my inadequate preparation." Attach Chen leaned forward, moving with deliberate slowness. "If I may make a suggestion, Ambassador, perhaps we should consider alternative negotiation protocols. My grandfather was a xenobiologist who specialized in interspecies stress responses. He always said that recognition of biological realities is the foundation of true diplomacy." "What do you propose?" Vexlor asked, genuinely curious despite the chemical dampening of his emotional responses. Dr. Watanabe activated his datapad. "We've taken the liberty of designing a modified negotiation framework. Virtual presence for your delegation, with quantum-encrypted real-time translation and response. No need for physical proximity until the final treaty signing, and even then, with enhanced environmental modifications." They had developed an entirely new diplomatic protocol in the 15 minutes of recess, a task that would have taken a conclave committee months of deliberation. "That would be most acceptable," Vexlor said, experiencing what might have been gratitude if the TEs hadn't been suppressing most of his emotional capacity. The remainder of the meeting proceeded with remarkable efficiency under the new protocol. Agreement was reached on all major points, with compromises that satisfied both conclave requirements and human interests. When the session concluded 2 hours later, a preliminary accord had been established, something that normally took dozens of sessions. As the human delegation prepared to depart, Envoy Rise approached the still active barrier that separated them, maintaining a respectful distance. "Ambassador Vexlor, if I may speak candidly." "Of course, Envoy," he replied. The TES ensuring his response remained measured. "We understand more than you might think. Humans may appear resilient to the dangers of the galaxy, but that's because our homeworld tried to kill us in 1,000 different ways every day of our evolutionary history." She smiled, careful now to keep her masticating bones concealed. "We're not oblivious to how we appear to species from more hospitable worlds. We're working on it." After the humans had departed, Dr. Ishana reviewed Vexlor's neural readings with professional concern. "You'll need an extended recovery period, Ambassador, and perhaps a revaluation of your suitability for human diplomatic assignments." Vexlor, still floating in the artificial serenity provided by the TES, contemplated the strange contradiction that humans represented. Terrifying in their capabilities and evolutionary adaptations, yet surprisingly thoughtful in their diplomatic approaches. "Schedule me for the full therapeutic regimen, Doctor," he said, "and then prepare a new supply of TES. The conclave will need more diplomats capable of human interaction, not fewer." "Despite the psychological toll?" she asked, genuinely surprised. "Because of it," he replied. "The humans are terrifying, yes. But today I learned something important. They know they're terrifying, and they're willing to accommodate our limitations rather than expect us to adapt to theirs. That kind of consideration from a species that could easily dominate through force. It's worth a few psychological scars." As the medication began its gradual decline, allowing more natural thought patterns to resume, Ambassador Vexlor found himself experiencing an emotion that the chemical cocktail couldn't fully suppress, a grudging respect for the deathworlders who, despite their frightening capabilities, chose diplomacy over dominance. Perhaps there was hope for the galaxy after all, even if that hope came in the form of terrifying apex predators who considered radiation storms a minor inconvenience and could perform emergency repairs with food synthesizer parts. The conclave would adapt. They would develop better medications, more effective protocols, and perhaps eventually they would learn to see beyond their instinctive fear to recognize humans for what they truly were, not just deathworlders, but potential allies worth the psychological discomfort of knowing.